going on, everybody? I am Mike Hughes. You are listening to the Shy Kid podcast presented by iHeartRadio's very own Give Us a Shot network. So before anything, because I'm only going to say it once because we got an amazing guest today, and we're not clickbaiting over here. Give us a like, give us a follow, give us a shot if you haven't already, because we got the finest, the hottest free agent in the building right now that isn't Ben Johnson. We got Nicholas Moreano from former CHGO Bears and currently in Chicago Bears media. Nicky, how we feeling, baby?
I'm doing good, man. Hey, if I'm the hot candidate, hopefully,
Hey.
that right next company makes the right choice. Hopefully, the Bears make the right choice and Ben Johnson, whatever it may be. But appreciate it, man. It's good to talk Bears football with you.
So we were talking a little bit backstage. You said you had a couple interviews lined up, right? Now we're gonna keep that private,
hmm
but tell me when you're going to Hallis Hall to interview for the head coaching job. Did you get that offer yet? Because they're interviewing a lot of people right now, Nick.
I have my phone right here. I'm kind of just waiting for the text or the call, whatever the Zoom call maybe that the Bears
Sure.
may be doing. But yeah, they are literally, if you are breathing, you may have a shot at the Bears head coaching job right now.
100%. And like, so what's frustrating me the most, and it's like, it's childish of me on my part, but as someone who every single day I'm working for social media accounts, and when I see the Chicago Bears have completed another interview, I've seen about 20 of these. If I had to share every single one they've posted, Nikki, is that a bad look of not the social media team, but just the Bears posting every single candidate that they've interviewed? Like when I saw David Shaw out of Stanford
hmm
and they posted that they completed an interview with him, I kind of thought in my head, it's no disrespect to David Shaw, but did we need to post that? And then the Arthur Smith one, I was like, you really probably should. It's like posting someone's ex. You know what I mean? It's like, well, maybe we just shouldn't have posted that one.
I think if you're the candidate, even if you're not gonna obviously get like the head coaching job, it puts it out there to every other team. Like, oh look, this guy, so and so is qualified enough to at least get into the building to do an interview. So I think it shows to the other, NFL teams like this is what he's currently doing, and it gets people talking. But yeah, it's I've kind of made it a fun little game where every single coach that kind of gets the social media graphic, I'll just go into the gifts and just post something like whatever number it is. I'll just put 13, which would be the next one, and then whichever one I feel fits right for that candidate, I'll post it on write a quote tweet it. But yeah, they're coming out with a lot, and they still have a lot to go right now.
Yeah, for sure. And if we would have known there was going to be this many candidates, you could have made it like a game. Like in the gifts, you could have did like Bears players that wore that number. You could have went from Jalen
True.
Johnson all the way. What are we at right now? We're looking at somebody in the 20s. That's what we're at right now. So it's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yep.
We're Tariq Cohen. Maybe we'll have a Tariq Cohen gift by the end of
Ooh,
this offseason.
throwback.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know if you checked that out. It was live the other day. I saw Brandon Marshall, Joshua Bellamy, Tariq Cohen, and Eddie Jackson were like all on a live talking about the 2018 Bears season, and it was like the coolest thing I ever saw. I have no idea what it was. I don't know if they're starting a podcast, but it was sick. I was like, and they were talking about it. They were like, "No, dude, like we were going to the Super Bowl. Like we had already beat the Rams." Tariq was like adamant about it. Bellamy was
hmm
trying to put in his 2 cents, but I was like, in my head, and this is me talking. This ain't Nick talking. But the last time I heard about Joshua Bellamy, I thought he was going to jail for the whole COVID thing that was going on. So I didn't even know his situation. I don't even know where Joshua Bellamy was. It was just good to see him. I was like, oh, I'm
hmm
happy he's making better choices. But yeah, man, it was cool to catch that up. But I want to catch up with you. The 2024 season. I was at training camp. I got to see all those Hard Knocks crews,
hmm
T-shirts. All the cameras were around. I mean, the next Michael Jordan in Chicago. Uh, Nikki, from the beginning of the offseason of 2024 to now, how do you think, I mean, this roller coaster of a season really just transpired to you from it going from, I think we can win the North, or even
Yeah.
not you saying that, but like those conversations to being, man, like, let's just get this season over with.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I had high expectations for this Bears team, just even with a rookie quarterback, but with the talent around Caleb Williams, you just thought that, this would translate into being a more competitive football team. I had them, I think, right before obviously the season started, we give out our record predictions. I had them at 10, and then out of, nowhere, oh, let's just bump it up one more. Why not? It's like, let's see what this Bears season can be. And obviously I couldn't have been more wrong, but I think, there was a lot of optimism just because of what Caleb Williams' talent was and just all the talent that you surrounded with him. But everything can go stemming back to the Hail Mary. It really can, because when you look at the losses that transpired right after that, I mean, you don't even show up in the game against Arizona.
Yep.
You get you get embarrassed by the New England Patriots of all teams at Soldier Field. You fire your then offensive coordinator. Thomas Brown gets promoted, and even when there was a chance and an opportunity to almost right the ship with the game against Green Bay, the field goal gets blocked. So that's where, if you didn't know it by then, this Bears team was just on a roller coaster to hell, in just in terms of trying to find just some semblance of optimism, hope. It just wasn't going to be found again for 10 straight games.
Mm.
And you ultimately win the last game of the season against Green Bay, which is a nice way for that Bears team that had been through so much to do that and to do it off a game-winning field goal. Like, that's, a good way to end things, but you can't neglect or disregard that 10-game losing streak. But it does go back to, how it ended with the Hail Mary loss and just the team never being able to find a way to rebound after that.
For sure, for sure. Now, I do want to ask this because I think a lot of people do wonder the composure in the locker room. I felt like it always stayed 100. There were a couple times where I feel like DJ Moore on the field was getting a lot of shit.
Mhm.
And honestly, like DJ's such a great guy. And I don't know DJ personally, but that's how I feel about it. I think DJ had every right to feel the way he did. They're trying to use him as a running back and as a Debo Samuel after a 1,300-yard season. Like, I'd be pretty pissed
Yeah.
off too. But you got a chance to work with Cole Kmet this past year, and I was wondering for you, from start to finish, could you kind of feel like not tension, but like just like the way the season was going through him? Like, obviously, I know you can't speak for him and how he's actually thinking, but like, could you kind of feel that wearing on a lot of guys in that locker room, whether that's Cole or that's somebody else?
Well, the thing with Cole, he was always so professional, and even with the losses, he could describe it in a way that as a fan or as someone who was working alongside him, it just made sense. Like, oh, we just, and again, it always came back to some of the details on certain plays or just lack of execution on other plays. But I think for the locker room, I would say for the most part, despite that 10-game losing streak, it did stay together. There were outbursts, in certain instances,
Right.
as there should be when a season goes the way it did. But even when Caleb Williams was just on the St. Brown brother podcast, like, he did talk about like that the locker room is a tight knit group, and I would attest to that it is a good group of guys. They do want to find a way to have more success with the Chicago Bears, but especially after the Thanksgiving game, like hearing what Jalen Johnson,
Mm-hmm.
kind of addressed to Matt Eberflus, and then the next day ended up getting fired. But even though this team was trending in the wrong direction, they were still a group that, like, when you went throughout the locker room throughout the week leading up to a game, guys are still talking amongst each other. There's still, I mean, it's not like it's all quiet. No one's like interacting. That's furthest from the truth, because I think that it was a great group of guys, but they just didn't win enough. And I think that challenged some of the players to speak out in certain instances. And the stuff you mentioned about DJ, I think he did get a bad rep for how he looked on the sidelines. I think he was just frustrated, man.
Yeah.
Like you said, coming off of a career year in yards, touchdowns, receptions, and then to be having this season when you do have guys like Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze, you're thinking, yeah, probably just share a little bit of the workload, but I'm still gonna have a successful season. That wasn't the case. It's a
Mm.
lot of a learning curve that Caleb Williams had to do when you're going through offensive coordinators and trying to do that. It's not going to be this season that you probably envisioned. So yeah, I think that if they can just obviously find that right guy, you still have a good locker room in place, and they do want to win in Chicago.
For sure. And, I have mixed emotions as a fan about Jalen Johnson's outburst because I felt like there were
Hmm.
times where Jalen Johnson didn't have the most effort and wasn't the best
True.
version of himself. Now, that's, granted, I'm not going to say that Jalen Johnson, a former Pro Bowler, and Matt Eberflus are in that same breath whatsoever. I'll give him a little grace, especially when we got Tyreek Stevenson waving on the sideline half the time. I don't know what you really want Jalen Johnson to do. But, like a lot of guys did impress me this year. Somebody that, really quickly before we really get into the grades and everything. Kyler
Yeah.
Gordon, man, can Spider Gordon? I know you're a huge Spider-Man fan, just like me. So like I know that's like a great gimmick. I love to see from him. Really was somebody that I thought going into this season could have been one of the weak links of that secondary. If we had to talk about the Kevin Byards, the Jaquan Briskers, Tyreek Stevenson, who honestly was one of the better defensive rookies at the corner position last year. I mean, Kyler Gordon really evolved and leveled up this year. Can you kind of talk about what you saw from him this season?
Yeah, I think you just saw a guy who's even more comfortable just playing that nickel spot. It's such an important position that every single NFL team needs to have, but it's also one of the most difficult to play. There's just so much space that you have to deal with. And you get not only the slot receiver, but you're seeing Devontae Adams playing the slot. You're seeing guys like Keenan Allen playing the slot. So if you're a guy like Kyler Gordon, you just got to be equipped to play everybody. And so I think just for him, just being able to recognize routes and route concepts was a huge thing for him going into this season. And, I spoke to someone recently within the organization talking about Kyler Gordon and specifically when it came in terms to the all pro list that recently came out. Kyler Gordon didn't get a single vote. Didn't think he would because of, again, that's an award that if you have a good team, you're playing in postseason football, you're going to get recognized.
Yeah.
If you're not in that category, if you're a guy like Kyler Gordon who's had a phenomenal season, you're definitely going to be missed. And he's somebody that, maybe a little biased, but just being around Kyler Gordon, believe that he is the best nickel corner in the league in terms of what he can do from a coverage standpoint, how physical he is, and being able to guard whoever is in that slot position. So if you're a guy like Kyler Gordon, you did everything you needed to do this season. Of course, maybe if you added like some interception, things like that, you're going to be very equipped to get paid. Yeah. And if you're Ryan Poles, you're looking at the guys that deserve it. That would be one of the candidates. So I think for Kyler Gordon, like we're only scratching the surface here. And once he, starts to, again, continue that chemistry, because Jalen Johnson's talked about him and Kyler. They don't even have to actually communicate with each other. They just know that's Spidey sense, right? Like the Spidey sense that you need to have to know exactly what's coming next. So Kyler, I only expect for him, as long as he can stay healthy, he's going to continue being a phenomenal player in this league.
No, without a doubt. And I think like a big thing, you mentioned that about like the popularity contest of the Pro Bowl. And we're not even going to get into what the Pro Bowl even is today. I'm not even going to have that debate about a flag football player thinking he's better than Patrick Mahomes. We're not even going to get into it, not even going to entertain it. But it does remind me a lot of 2018. The 12-4 Bears with the best defense in the league. Bryce Callahan gets a lot more recognition than he would anywhere else because he has guys around him that are just making him look so much better. So obviously, when the wins come with that, I still think this is a secondary that is one of the better secondaries in the entire league. I think you get the right coaching staff around them and you really just bring that other pass rusher, that other edge rusher into the building. I think it definitely does make it a huge dynamic. So for you, man, like looking at this secondary, Kevin Byard, kind of a question mark about the future of what's going to go on with him. But the big one, what do you think about Jaquan Brisker? Because as someone who I always joke about it on the pod when I had Daniel Carcillo, Carbon was on here. He's a former Blackhawk. We were talking about I've had like 4 or 5 concussions, and probably like there's a bunch more that just weren't even documented. So for him though, on a serious level, this is back-to-back years where you didn't really see him for a period of time. He talked about in 2023, he just sat in a dark room for months, kind of going through it. And this happens again to him. He's a hit stick, man. I love the way he plays, but do you think it's sustainable at this time? And not to kind of put it in a hard spot, but could you see the Bears drafting another safety this year?
Yeah, I'll start with that second part. I definitely can see them drafting another safety just because at this point you almost expect Jaquan Brisker to miss some time. That's just the reality of the situation. And these concussions they're weird, man. Like everybody's different. Everybody deals with them in a different way. And sometimes symptoms don't pop up until weeks later. And that concussion he suffered was against Carolina. And then you go to London and you don't see Jaquan Brisker for the rest of the season. And, I talked to guys around the locker room, just checking up. Like, how is Jaquan? Do you even see Jaquan? Because there was a point in time in the locker room, Mike, where he would be around and you're not allowed to talk to him, but he would be around and be at his locker. You couldn't tell anything. But then there was a point where you just didn't see number 9. And he would be by the DBs and things like that. But, some of the guys I spoke with, said he was in good spirits. He was in the meetings at least doing some of those things. But if you're Ryan Poles, like when Jaquan Brisker finally left because of the concussion, you saw the run defense also take a hit
Yeah.
because that's where he is most impactful. You can put him in the box. He is a really good tackler, physical player, and the fumble that he caused on the concussion that he sustained, like that was a game-changing play there against Carolina. So
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're Ryan Poles, you just need to ensure that you have somebody that you can count on. And it's unfortunate because like Kyler Gordon, he was trending in this right direction. Jaquan Brisker was having a really good season for the first 6 weeks, and then the concussion derails all that. So it is unfortunate, but if you're Ryan Poles, like you have to be thinking safety at some point in the draft. You have a bunch of draft picks and you can potentially make that move, but you just gotta make sure you have a safety blanket to go with Jaquan Brisker because there's just no certainty that he's going to be able to play a full season.
Yeah, without a doubt. And also that contract's coming up too. And at this
Yeah.
point, it's like, it sucks because it's a what have you done for me lately league. And I think for a guy like Ryan Poles, we've seen time and time again where he didn't want to pay guys who actually did produce. Like Robert Quinn. Hey man, here's 20 sacks on the year. Nah, you gotta go. You know what I mean? So like seeing guys like Kevin Byard on expiring deals soon, and then obviously Jaquan having a payday hopefully sometime soon. It's frustrating I think as a fan because you know how good he can be. It's definitely something we're always thinking about him because even me, like I remember I've had a few, and I remember there was one specifically where it was like you're on your ass for about 8 to 9 months, and that's just day to day. You're still going to work, you're still doing your thing, but you're not present. And I think that for an NFL player is a totally different conversation. But I'm excited to get into this, man, to really just get into how you feel these players went. Now I have obviously we talk about the 2024 draft. A lot of people still feel the way they do about Torrey Taylor getting drafted as high as he did. I know you're an Iowa guy. I see it in the background. I still thought it was a great move then. I still today think it's a great move. But we're gonna go and grade the 2024 picks for Ryan Poles. Now we're gonna start off with QB1, the number one overall pick. Where are you at right now, Nick, in Caleb Williams' 2024 performance? If you had to grade him like a teacher, A to F, where do you have him at?
Yeah, the grade I would give Caleb Williams, and there's a lot that goes into his rookie season. It's a B plus, and here are the reasons why you have to do that. And I think for Caleb, 17 games played, something that you don't see typically from Bears quarterbacks, especially given all the hits he did take this season, and some of it on his own. The 68 sacks is one thing you look at where he does need to clean that up, but the guys up front can easily help him out with that. But there are just times where I think Caleb, and even he acknowledged it, he can get rid of the ball a little bit quicker. He can go through his progressions a little bit faster, not wait for the deep ball that's never there due to coverage and just take the check down. So there are things that he needs to work on. But you look at, like, obviously the Bears ended up with 5 wins on the season. But could they realistically have ended up maybe with somewhere 8 to 9? I think so if you just look at what Caleb Williams was responsible for in some of the fourth quarters. Before that Hail Mary happens, Caleb Williams leads the Bears down the field to get them in a position to have the lead. I don't know. I think that gets overlooked because of how the game actually ended. Green Bay at Soldier Field with the field goal being blocked. Another, play that we talked about earlier in the show. You forced overtime against Minnesota at Soldier Field. Caleb Williams doesn't have a say in the defense, and, you end up losing that game as well. But then also the final seconds, how Detroit ended. But you were all the way backed up where I forget exactly what yard line, but Caleb is the one that leads you all the way down there. And then dysfunction happens at the end. But those are all positives that you can take from Caleb Williams' rookie season in those high pressure moments where he needs to make a play. And he does, but something else maybe happens that factors into the Bears ultimately losing. But you look at the final game of the season, I think where it shows so much growth from a guy like Caleb Williams is him adjusting the route that DJ Moore was supposed to run on that final play before Cairo Santos kicks the game-winning field goal, depending on the coverage, taking the vert and make it more of a in-breaking route. The perfect play for that type of coverage to get that opportunity to kick the field goal. That shows growth from Caleb Williams, a trust from Thomas Brown that he's going to see something, make the right check. And I think it was either that week or the week before I asked Thomas Brown, does Caleb even have the ability to adjust the play at the line of scrimmage? He said it's very little flexibility. So when you hear that and then he changes the play and it works, like those are signs of growth. And that's what you want to take from his rookie season. So you factor all that in with 3,514 yards, a 20 touchdown, took care of the ball pretty well with only the 6
Mhm.
interceptions. So there's a lot to like from Caleb's rookie season. Things that he obviously needs to work on, like every one of these rookie quarterbacks, but B plus would be the grade I'd give him.
Yeah, for sure. And also like I know it's a lot of people hate when I mention this, 9 straight games without an interception. I believe that's what it ended at.
Yeah.
A lot of people will be in my comments and tell you also didn't win a game during those 9 games. So like I understand where people
Yeah.
are coming
Yep.
from, but
Mhm.
a win is a win. I'll take it. But you kind of mentioned the little things, the small indices of okay, well he's figuring out the DJ Moore that we all know. You know what I mean? Like he had to figure out the kind of routes DJ is going to run or when he's going to give up on it and just kind of go off on a breakaway. For you, how much of a leap do you think he took from USC Caleb Williams to Chicago Bears Caleb Williams? Because when I did a little scouting report for Give Us a Shot, it was kind of like, hey, this is a guy that doesn't turn over the ball. He's going to get you the yards you want. He holds on to it a little bit too long.
Mhm.
And that's really some of the big things for Caleb. He takes the big hits that he shouldn't. That was kind of exactly what we saw in 2024. Now, obviously, Jaden Daniels has, developed into who he is today, kind of similar to who he was at LSU. I watched every single game of him at LSU. I don't see that much of a difference, but you can definitely see the growth from a winning perspective. What have you seen from Caleb this year specifically that is different from what we saw the year he won the Heisman or even his final year at USC?
Well, I think especially towards the end of the season where he had it's weird, I'm going to say stability with at least Thomas Brown calling the plays and understanding what he's going to get out of him. I think what you saw a little bit more of is with Caleb, he knew to throw to spots. And, not that he didn't do that at USC, but he was becoming more right on what those decisions should be. And I, bring up the Thursday night play where Roma Dunze and him are off on the in breaking route in the middle of the field. Caleb was right to throw it exactly where he threw it.
Mm-hmm.
Rome stops in the window before that, and it ends up being an incomplete pass. But I just think that in terms of what Caleb was supposed to do on given plays, when Thomas Brown, like I said earlier, not giving him much flexibility to change him, he's doing the right things. And again, I don't want to say that he wasn't doing the right things at USC, but he was just
Right.
doing it more frequently, I think, towards the end, and especially in that game against Green Bay, just operating the offense to the best of his ability. So I think that is, again, a step in the right direction. But it makes it really difficult to evaluate Caleb Williams' rookie season when you go through a guy like Shane Waldron and you have Thomas Brown and you're just running these offenses and not running it exactly how you would ideally want. Like Thomas Brown would have installed different things from the very beginning if he was the OC from day one
Mm-hmm.
than what he had to take from Shane Waldron because that's what they knew and then run it for the rest of the season. So it's like it's difficult. And still, Caleb, I think, had a lot of success in certain aspects of his rookie season. But if you started off on the right track in the beginning, and that's what they can do this time around with a new head coach, an offensive play caller that's going to mesh with Caleb, I think you're just going to see really immediate results. You should, because I think Caleb, not only is he a very talented player, but we know he wants to be great. And to be great, you got to put the time in and do all these things that are going to allow him to do that on the football field. So it's just really like I give him B plus grade, but
Yeah.
it is a tough evaluation just because of all the different factors that went into that rookie season of his.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's an A plus for even just walking into the situation. You know what I mean? Like that's at that
Yeah.
point, like it just thanks for being here. But you kind of mentioned a guy who we'll kind of we'll ignore him a little bit on this pod because it's just not relevant, and I just don't even want to think about it. But Shane Waldron, man, you got a chance to be a part of the Super Bowl last year, and a little
Yeah.
clip that went viral months later. Months later, Jackson Smith and Jigba's interview with you guys went pretty viral about how he felt about Shane Waldron. I just want to ask you, from your perspective, when that happened, was that something you just brushed off, or was that something you kind of thought about after the fact? Like, why did he say that? He was basically like, "Are we live right now? Like, is it okay if we talk about this?" Like, did that raise any eyebrows to you in the moment? And obviously, long term, we now understand why.
Yeah, so definitely raised eyebrows, right in the moment. Like we can't ignore that because of how awkward it was, but also telling at the same time. And he also, like, I was trying to justify, where Jack Smith and Jigba was coming from. Like he was the rookie wide receiver at the time. There's
Right.
Tyler Lockett. There was DK Metcalf. Maybe he just didn't see
K9.
the workload that he wanted. So I was like trying to think, okay, maybe he's a little upset about things, but I just never thought it would get to the point that it did, where it's like, oh, okay, let's rewind the tape, watch that again. And that's why, Jackson Smith-Njigba said what he said about Shane Waldron. And through press conferences too, throughout the weeks, we would get the coordinators once a week. He just was never a good communicator. It almost seemed like he was being forced to do this, and he kind of is being forced to do it. But you can do it in a more natural way, like just speak to the media. It's not like we're a bad group of people, or anything. We're just asking questions. So it just, how he was communicating to us, you can almost just imagine what were those meetings like for the players. And maybe, look, X and O's, he could probably be a guy that knows his stuff, but it's how you articulate that plan, that game plan to this group of guys that I think is going to resonate. And when we saw it on game days, it just didn't translate to what maybe he was thinking was going in the coaching room. But there were signs. You just would never have thought that it got to that point where you had to fire him after the New England game and then just, move on from there.
Sure, it wasn't even at that point in Seattle. He even finished the season there. So, I don't think anybody would have expected that. And, kind of like you mentioned, you're, working for the Sky since 2019. When I was with James Wade, now he's with the Toronto Raptors and he's doing his thing. But he put the fear of God in some people, man. I'll tell you, he'll call you a motherfucker right to your face. And that's just what it was. But if you ask him a question about the X's and O's, a very articulate, a very deep thought answer, and he'll give it to you, unless it was a horrible question. You know what I mean? Why did we lose the game? He'll tell you straight up because they scored more points than us. That's the kind of, you know what I mean? He's not wrong.
No.
But what I noticed with Shane was there wasn't a lot of dialogue about why guys are doing what they're doing, why a deep ball guy, a guy who's going to beat you in the one-on-ones, and Rome Odunze is running curl routes and 10 and ins. That was stuff that you never really got answers to. Now, I think if I was interviewing future head coach of the Bears, Nicholas Moreano, he would tell me that Caleb Williams has 2 seconds to throw that ball and Rome doesn't have enough time to get separation. That's what I would say. But to never even hear something like that, just be honest, I think would just saved everybody. But when you talk about JSN and the season he had last year with Shane Waldron versus this year, it was completely different. Now, the next grade we're going to get into is the new rookie on the block, Rome Odunze. I got a chance to meet him the other week. He's huge, and you've seen me, Nick. We saw me at sports, whatever. I don't even know what it's called. Some softball league we were playing in, whatever the league was called. I'm 5'8", so everyone in my comments is like, "Bro, how short are you?" I'm like, "This guy's 6'3", bro. I don't know what you want." But man, what a year for Rome. I think honestly it went a lot better than I expected. I think 734 yards, right under Keenan Allen for that third slot. I had him around 500 to 600. I can't lie. I thought Keenan was going to be a lot more involved. Obviously DJ coming off a 1300 season. 3 touchdowns, 734 yards, pardon me. 54 receptions off 101 targets. What do you grade Rome Odunze, especially for where he was drafted at number 9?
Yeah, there's a lot of expectations that come with that draft slot, but you paint the picture out perfectly. You also had 2 other guys in the room that were going to get more targets, more receptions, things like that. So for me, that 734 yards that he ended with, I think that's a decent number for Rome, especially given that this season also, a lot of the things that Caleb had to deal with, obviously it translated with Rome as well, but maybe just start with the negatives from what I saw from him and then turn to the positive to end the discussion about Rome is that, I think one thing that he needs to get better at is just some of his run blocking. There are a lot of times where, whether it's Shane Waldron or Thomas Brown, he's asked to be, a run, just provide support in the run game. And I think there were just at times he was caught off guard or just not in the best position or just didn't secure blocks. And that obviously there were times that Rome was able to secure those, but just being more consistent in that aspect. He's a big body, like you said. I love talking to Rome, but I also feel like you're damn, dude, I get let's sit down for this let's sit down for this interview. So, I don't feel extra small next to you, but he's a big body. He could be used in that way and being versatile that someone can line up outside, inside, you can find ways to get creative when he's asked to run block. Looking at, I know how some people feel about PFF, but, I do think they have some metrics that are worthy of taking note of. But
Sure.
his drop grade percentage, 61.7% out of receivers with at least 30 targets, he was ranked 73rd. There were some times where, I don't know, either maybe he wasn't expecting the ball to be there or just lack of concentration at times where the ball, just didn't make the catch. But I think for the most part, Rome is a sure-handed wide receiver because we've seen plays throughout his rookie season where, especially the one against the San Francisco 49ers in the back of the end zone, where not only is it a great catch, but the body position. Those are those elite traits that you like to see from a guy like Rome. So just cleaning up some of those things, but also contested catches. Like there were a couple of times where Caleb is going to give you a shot, he's going to
Mm-hmm.
come down with it. And then you see some of the, fourth down receptions that he had during the season. I think two of them came against the Detroit Lions, where one was a contested catch and one is on a nice outbreaking route. Caleb or Rome goes low to catch the football. Those are the things you love to see. And like you were saying earlier, I think there were just times where he was misused on the type of routes he was running. Like this is a guy that you want to see stretching vertical. He's want to give him more opportunities to use his frame to make catches on smaller DBs. And still, he had 734 yards and the 3 touchdowns, where I think you'll see obviously increase if the Bears don't retain a guy like Keenan Allen. So I think for his
Yeah.
rookie season, what it was, what he was dealing with, and then still being on, he had to learn to be on the same page with Caleb, and that was an up and down roller coaster the entire season. For me, he gets a B minus, and maybe
Okay.
I'm a little harsher on the grade, but B minus for Rome. And there's so much room for him to continue to grow. And if this is an A by the next time 2025 season ends, that would
Yeah.
not surprise me whatsoever.
Without a doubt, I gave him a B minus, C plus at worst for me too. And I think outside of the 2 fumble game,
Yeah.
it really was a great season for Rome. Like I remember exactly when that happened. I was actually talking to my buddy, and I was like, Kevin Lapka, and I was talking to
Mm-hmm.
him, and I was like, Nick's dog would have caught that. You know what I mean? Like Nick's dog would have caught that ball. I don't know what we're talking about. Rome's got to get them hands down. Yeah, y'all gotta follow Nicky on Instagram. His dog, amazing catches every single morning. They do amazing work over there. I'm just saying. But
I
um,
appreciate it, man.
no, man, you kind of talked about Keenan just a little bit before we get back into the grading. This is a guy I saw wearing a scarf, mittens, and a ski mask in September. Do you expect him to come back to
That's
Chicago,
crazy.
or do you think he's like, fuck this, I'm going back to LA?
It's a really good question because, again, go referencing the St. Browns brothers podcast, like, Caleb was asked who's the best player he played with. He mentioned Keenan,
Mm-hmm.
and Keenan for, up and down season, I think even with his time with the Bears, but you see the value a guy like that has, not only for a guy like Rome, but for obviously Caleb Williams as well. If the number comes out to being right, I think he'd be open to it. I don't know what that number would be, but it needs to be something that's going to be mutually beneficial for both the Chicago Bears and Keenan Allen. But the thing is, you know, I still think if you keep him around, you're not seeing the best version of Rome. That's just the reality of the situation, because I
Sure.
think a lot of the things that Keenan can do in terms of where he can line up and create mismatches, I think Rome could be very similar in doing that. So as long as you're going to have DJ for a couple more years, which is obviously good for the Bears offense, but you keep Keenan around, you're still waiting to see where Rome could potentially be in year 2. Now you have to wait till year 3. So it's not that I don't want Keenan to be there, because I think he would help this Bears offense. It's just I think it's all going to come down to the numbers and seeing exactly if the Bears are really considering having that investment at that position where they do have some other needs, especially on the offensive line, that they have to address. And you have a guy like Rome that, like I said earlier, can do a lot more in year 2.
Yeah, without a doubt. I like it. And I also, again, we talk about polls all the time. I don't expect polls to go anywhere anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
So really for me, knowing the kind of guy he is, I'm not going to pay you to be a 2 or maybe even a 1B and then have Rome take over. It's just not in his best interest to be able to do that. Now, obviously, Keenan over Tyler Scott any day. But I think from that perspective, I think you could even see polls saying I'd rather go in free agency, get a guy who's a solidified 3, not available now, but a Tyler Boyd caliber player,
Mm-hmm.
I think is kind of what you're looking for out of that. And also Keenan got to know what Keenan wants to do. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
yeah, maybe, hey, Harbaugh's winning over there. Maybe I'll go back. Or, hey, let's go join the other 35 injured wide receivers on the Kansas City Chiefs and just get a
true.
free ring. So I don't know what it's in Keenan's best interest. I think he's not an odd guy, but a very low key guy. Like, I think
Hmm.
Keenan's life is Keenan's life. Like, even I think you would even attest to it on Hard Knocks. Did not see Keenan Allen outside of that DJ Moore segment, and I think that was for good reason. I don't think he wanted to be a part of it. I don't think a lot of guys wanted to. But getting into number three, man, the man who said Caleb Williams will not be touched, sacked 68 times in 2024. Illinois native, so you got to give him some
Yeah.
love. Went to Yale, love to see it. Number 75th overall pick, third rounder, Karan Amagachi. Listen, I tried to give him a D plus just because he wasn't on the field a lot, and everybody in my comments, and I mean everybody, said give him an F. This guy stinks. So where are you at, Nick? You saw him throughout the entire season from start to finish. Obviously, injuries are part of it. So I don't
Hmm.
know if that changes how you would grade him. But Karan Amagachi's rookie year, what do you got?
I think I was one of those burner accounts in the comments saying give him an F there, Mike. I was right there with you. The unfortunate thing for Karan Amagaji, and the Bears knew this, is that he was coming in injured. They knew that, right? He was supposed to participate in the Senior Bowl, couldn't do that due to the injury that he sustained. So we just did not see Karan Amagaji, and training camp wasn't available. And then when he was starting to practice, you're very limited during the season what you're allowed to actually do and what the Bears are actually doing. So in terms of actually being ready, I don't think he was. And
Mm,
that's why when he got that first start against the Minnesota Vikings on Monday Night Football, it showed. I mean, the four total pressures, the one sack, the four penalties. And I remember asking Karan Amagaji after that game, like, did you expect help on the one play where Caleb Williams damn near died, or what ended up happening? He's like, no, that was just me one on one. I'm like, oh, okay. So that, I mean, again, it's not an ideal situation to be in. He knew he was going to start the day before the game, but still, as a professional athlete, you prepare like you are the starter.
mm,
And going into that Monday Night Football game, Karan Amagaji was not the starter. He wasn't the backup. He's on essentially could have been a practice squad player playing that game, because that's what it looked like just from how he was coming out of his stance. I think a little bit later on in the game, he settled down a little bit, but it wasn't a good showing. Against Washington, he also got an opportunity to play
mm,
some snaps, 45 snaps at left tackle, allowed four total pressures in that game. So when you factor in that he wasn't available, which is a part of it, the performance that he got an opportunity to play wasn't great. And I don't know, if anything, I know more of what he isn't than what he could be
mm.
in the NFL right now, which I think is not a great place to be. Like right now, he's not a player that you can count on. It's so early on in his career, so I'm not going to, rule him out. But at this point, going into 2025, like low expectations for Karan Magachi. Just be available to practice. Let's see
Right.
if you can gain some reps there. But I wouldn't, like, if you're Ryan Poles, if you're the Bears, like you're not looking at Karan Magachi as the maybe replacement for Braxton Jones at any point. Like if you're thinking that, like we have a bunch of different issues, especially going into 2025. So for me, also not someone that was a special teams contributor, even on field goals or anything like that. 15 snaps there, he does get an F. And like there's some questions to be had about drafting a guy in the third round out of Yale who was injured and didn't do anything in his rookie season to make you feel better about that pick.
Mm,
So there's a lot to be seen of what Karan Amagaji can actually do. And that's where you, as a Bears fan, as someone who covers the team, like you just are very skeptical of what he can be. And it just goes to, again, the track record at this point of Ryan Poles in the third round. Like there are just a bunch of misses
yeah.
when he gets that pick. And if Ian Cunningham goes to sign with another team's or GM spot, they're going to get a third round pick. It's like, well, what are the Bears going to actually do with it?
Hmm.
Because the track record isn't good with what they have done so far.
Dude, I will never in my life forget. And I hope there comes a day where when I have kids in the future and you have kids in the future, with your amazing fiance, by the way. Shout out to him. Shout out Nikki boy. Shout out Nikki boy. But I hope our kids don't find that HBO Max series and I have to explain why Valus Jones Jr. got his own episode. And it's just horrible. It's like who was this guy? I'm gonna be like, some say Devin Hester, some say not a contributor at all. The NFL for whatever reason decided to put him as a main product when they started to change the kickoff rules. So I don't even know why that was. To this day, I think about that. But next up, we got the legend. We got the Aussie. We got the guy himself, the fourth rounder, the most questionable pick in the entire draft, according to many Bears fans. The Iowa legend of Tory Taylor, fourth round, 122nd overall. As much as I want to say Tory Taylor had a great season, statistically, he wasn't even a top five punter in a lot of categories. So for you, man, as a guy who somehow, some way loves Iowa football and the Chicago Bears,
Torture.
how do you evaluate Tory Taylor's rookie year, where he went from not going to be punting much at all to punting every single day, at least 4 or 5 times?
Yeah, actually, he had the second most punts in the league. So it's far, far from what him and Caleb were talking about early on when they got drafted. So, for me, like I'm not an expert on punting, and you can look at the statistics, but for me, I just went in and just asked some people that do know about punting and some of the things that they wanted me to look at in terms of stats, and I'm like, okay, Tory Taylor is actually up there, like punts inside the 20. I mean, he's tied for the fourth most at 34. That's according to ESPN. Then I looked at PFF. They somehow have different ones. He had 38, which is tied for the third most. So it's interesting how they were different, but still top five in the league in that metric. He broke an over 100-year history franchise record for gross and net punt yards. And if you, like you mentioned, like I'm an Iowa and Bears fan, it's a lot of bad offensive football being played. So hey, Tory Taylor broke that because he was out there most of the time when the offense couldn't sustain drives. The second most punts that he also had the most in the league, but also had no blocks associated with that. I think that not only goes to Tory Taylor, but also the whole, punting team and what they're able to do. But he was also special teams player of the week after his performance against the Rams at Soldier Field, averaged 55.4 yards on 5 punts. And shout out to Larry Mayer, who been writing about the Bears longer than I've probably been living. The third highest average by a Bears punter in a game since at least 1960, with a minimum of 4 punts. And Taylor landed 3 of those punts inside the 20. And I think the big thing that Tory Taylor needs to work on, and Richard Hightower, the special teams coach, has also said this in a bunch of press conferences, just consistency with him. Being, whether that's just the hang time that he has, where he's actually putting some of these punts. I also think because he has such a big leg, some of those gunners, and I think they figured it out towards the end of the season, weren't getting down the field fast enough for the time that, Tory was actually punting. And there's a timing aspect to this and how they have to time everything up.
Sure.
So for me, even though you look at some of the metrics that say that he wasn't even, maybe middle of the pack or where he could be, I still think there's more to Tory Taylor than what we saw. And hopefully we just don't see as much Tory Taylor. Like, again, Iowa guy, but we just don't want to see as much of him in 2025 because the offense is hopefully better. But I still think he graded out for me as a B minus, a guy that is like, he's been advertised as a weapon. I do believe he still can be that. In that atrocious Thursday night football game against the Seattle Seahawks, he had, I believe it was 6 punts and none of them were returned from the Seahawks. And one play where it kind of shows the synchronization of the punt and the gunner was that Tyler Scott tackle, where Tory puts in the left, or I guess would be the right corner, and Scott's right there to make the tackle. That's the gunner being on the same page with the big-legged punter, and then making a play where you're not getting any return yards off of that. I think if they continue to work on that aspect of it, you're going to see less punts actually be returned, more punts inside the 20. And again, he was tied in the top 5 for doing that. So Tory Taylor, although a very controversial pick for a lot of Bears fans, especially given could they have drafted, I don't know, was an offensive lineman there, a defensive lineman, pass rusher, whatever. You go with the punter, the second punter that Ryan Poles has drafted. I still give him a B minus for what he did and what he's still capable of doing.
I'm gonna be the couch coach. I'm gonna give him an A+. You know, we could talk
All
about the
right.
metrics and the numbers, and I saw a lot of stats were saying he's like ranked 18th in a lot of categories. I could give a fuck, part of my language for everybody watching, but I don't care. I watched him in person. I was there at the first game. Nick, me and my cousin were like, man, it's super expensive, man. $350 a ticket for opening day. Let's just see Caleb Williams' first NFL passing touchdown, or just a or a touchdown in general. Like
That would have
let's
been
see
nice. Yep.
something. Didn't see it. Saw Simone Biles' husband get one though. That was cool. But I saw a lot of Tory Taylor, and everything every Iowa fan has told us about him is the truth. I mean, the man can punt the football, and I think that for me was just everything. And a lot of people feel differently. Man, if I'm punting the shit out of a football as hard as I can 10 times a game, I think that ninth or 10th time might not have as much heat as the first five did. You know what I mean? So I think definitely just used to the max and never really let us down. So I'm giving him an A just because of the situation, just because of what he was going into, told he wasn't going to punt, and like you said, top three. So like that's what we're talking about. So I'm giving him an A. But next up is one that I had a really hard time grading,
Hmm.
especially not being a starter in college. Austin Booker, 144th overall, fifth round pick. That's our final one before we get into the coaches. And then I gotta let Nikki out of here, man. His girl's gonna start wondering where he is. He's gonna be like, "What are you doing with Mike?" Like, but Austin Booker, man, didn't get a lot of opportunity. Whereas Karana Magachi, when he did get that opportunity, pretty much shit the bed. We really didn't see much of Book. And I thought we were going to see a lot more of him. Obviously, they make that trade to get Taylor from Seattle. And Taylor was great in a lot of instances. I really feel like early in the season, we had
Hmm.
something there. And then obviously people started adjusting to him being a smaller edge rusher. But for you, man, what did you see from Austin Booker? What would you, I guess, unfairly grade him? I'm not trying to give him a pass, but I just think it's a weird situation.
It is a weird situation because he only had 283 total defensive snaps, and like you said, he didn't play all that much even in college. So this is a raw prospect in a lot of ways. So, but just I remember just talking with coaches throughout the season and say like this guy just has an unorthodox way of getting to the quarterback, and we just didn't really get enough opportunities to see all of that. And I think with Austin Booker, maybe why he didn't get on the football field as much as maybe he could have, especially given like that defensive line, they just needed guys to step up. Like his ability to stop the run is set edges specifically is going to be a way that if Austin Booker can just put a little bit more size onto his frame, like he's going to get on the football field more. And just in
Mm-hmm.
year two, he should get on the football field. But he had 10 total pressures, 15 total sacks, but the 14 stops, which is an interesting metric by PFF, and what that means is a tackle that constitutes as a failure for the offense. So all but one of his tackles led to that metric of a stop. So when he's making tackles, they're it's in favor of stopping these plays from actually getting going. And one of the things that you did see that actually won't pop up in any stat sheet is the hustle from Austin Booker. There's a
Yeah.
bunch of plays where he's on the field where he's tracking the ball carrier backside. It's like those are things you want to see, even if he's not making the tackle, but you're just seeing the effort out of him. And he also had a little bit of contribution on special teams, 77 total special team snaps. But because we didn't see enough of him, like you, I had a tough time grading him, but I just a C. Like not for better or for worse,
Sure.
but he's there's a lot that he can obviously improve on. You just need to see him get on the football field. But if he just adds some more weight to his frame, you can count on him to be in more of those run type of plays, and then see what he can do as a pass rusher. Because a lot of especially the defensive line coach Travis Smith, like the thing that he would always say about Booker is like he's just unorthodox, man. You'll use his arms in weird ways, and he's all legs. It's kind of weird when you look at
Yeah.
him. Like he puts on his pads and just legs are go on for days. So it's like use that somehow to your advantage. And if he puts on more weight and gets more opportunities, I think you're gonna see more from Austin Booker. But he gets a C, and again, I think that's just because of the lack of sample size.
Yeah, you heard it here. If Nick is the coach of the Chicago Bears in 2025, Austin Booker drop kicking offensive tackles in the very first play. But man, I give Ryan Poles as a whole, I give him a C. I think I have to give him a C when we talk about the grade for that. And we can keep this one kind of short just because, we'll get into that in a little bit later, what Poles has been able to do or lack of. But I think, obviously you hit with Caleb. I'm not one of those guys, maybe we should have took Jaden. No, that's not where I'm at today. That's not where I'll be at tomorrow, even if they do win a playoff game this weekend again. It's just frankly, it's just a better situation. So for you, where do you grade Ryan Poles in this draft where one guy you have a really hard time even grading. The
Mm-hmm.
other guy is a punter, and then obviously Rome and Caleb had the seasons that they had.
Man, this is I think the toughest out of all the grades for me, but and you draft Caleb, and I think that was a consensus from everybody that he was going number one. So I don't know if it's fair for me, but I don't even know how much credit I give to Ryan Poles for drafting Caleb Williams. Like, yeah,
Exactly.
you're going to take him, and I like you. I still think that even though Jaden's having all this success and great situation with
Sure.
being with Cliff, like Caleb can still be a damn good player, and he is going to be. I do believe that, and Jaden can be too. So for me with this draft specifically, let's say you nail on Caleb. I think Rome's going to be a damn good receiver.
Sure.
Torrey, I think, is also going to be a good player. Then you have two kind of up in the air with Karan Amagaji, and
Yeah.
he's more trending in the downward direction. Austin Booker, there's more upside. I don't know if it's fair for me to, we're going to go B minus. B
Okay.
minus, I think, seems like a fair place for what he drafted. I know, like, the Quran, maybe for some people, is just going to bring that grade all the way down.
Right.
A
That's why I'm
punter,
at a C.
yeah,
That's why
and a
I'm at a
punter
C.
might just bring it all the way down, too. It's like, why are you
Mm-hmm.
drafting a punter? So I completely
Sure.
get that. And some people might look at, well, you drafted Rome, but should you have drafted an offensive lineman
Mm-hmm.
at that spot? Like, in hindsight, would that have helped Caleb Williams more this season? I don't know. Maybe coaching would have made this whole entire season what it was, despite the different talent that you had at different positions. So I'll go with that B minus on the fact that what you have, and I think the top two picks and Torrey Taylor. So B minus for Ryan Poles in
I think
2024.
it's very generous. That's why we love Nick. He's just a nice guy. I don't think he'll ever. I think outside of the Crown Amagachi, I don't think you'll hear Nick talk too much shit about anybody in the Bears org right now. And I mean in the Bears org. Like he can go on for days about Flus and Waldron and all and
True.
Bayless. We could do that all day. They're not here no more. We don't have to lie. That's like me when Mitch got out of town. Like I was the biggest Mitch Trubisky supporter, and the second he was gone, I was like, nah, yeah, I knew he was like, yeah, we knew, like, it's just our guy. We
Mm-hmm.
just gotta rock with him. But before we get you out of here, man, we have to talk about the head coaching. But really quickly, something that I think doesn't get talked about enough, and really, I just want to put it in your head so that Nick can talk to the right people, so we get it talked about more. Ryan Poles, former offensive lineman for the Chicago Bears. In his first 3 years as the general manager, you're looking at a team that went from 58 sacks in 2022 to 50 sacks in 2023 and now 68, pardon me, in
Mm-hmm.
2024. This is a former offensive lineman, and shout out to Pat from ESPN who actually said this. You're drafting guys who play like you. But really, I think the big one here is you're not drafting guys. Outside of Karan and Darnell Wright, which I think we would all agree, they were going to take an offensive lineman just a year ago. But for you, man, like, is this a fireable offense for a general manager who has played the position and has the second least money spent in the entire NFL on the position in 2024? You bring in Nate Davis, who, that's another guy.
Mm-hmm.
Nick's not going to talk too much shit about these guys, but Nate Davis is one of those guys I think a lot of people felt a certain type of way about. He really hasn't addressed that line whatsoever. And you can make that argument that, hey, with Fields, we're not really going to because we want to plan it all out for Caleb. It can't all be done in one offseason, but it really feels like, these first 6 rounds should be spent on the offensive line for the Chicago Bears this year because he hasn't addressed it at all outside of Darnell Wright.
Yeah, you would just think from Ryan Poles that there would be more of a pressing need to address, not just if you're going to get guys, even in free agency, like, or trading guys for guys like Ryan Bates and acquiring guys like Coleman Shelton. You're not just doing it to get guys. You need dudes at the position, guys that you can actually count on that are going to provide consistent snaps for you and just give your rookie quarterback a chance. And for Ryan Poles, being a former offensive lineman, you would think he would just understand that a little bit more.
Mm.
Like it's not about like just acquiring people and having bodies there. You want to have quality people there, especially at the center position, man. Like out of all those positions, like that's the one that's going to really help out the quarterback the most, I think, just from terms of calling out things, not allowing pressure to come right up the middle. And that was what was happening consistently against Coleman Shelton. And I get it, like maybe at times they're strained by the cap, but like you need to find ways to acquire the best players at that position and just in general at the offensive line group. So if you're Ryan Poles, like I think you asked the question, is it a fireable offense? Yeah, it should be, because if you're not putting your rookie quarterback in the best position to succeed because you didn't feel like you needed to put better players at that group, that's on you. And Ryan Poles should understand that better than anybody, having played the position and being, so well equipped to know exactly what it takes to be good at it, and knowing what he had in Kansas City too, like with Patrick Mahomes, the guys that they have there blocking for him, like that. You should look at that and just be able to find guys, and that should be such a pressing necessity in this next upcoming draft. Like I get it, you shouldn't draft for need, but if you're weighing like a grade similar from an offensive lineman that could potentially fill a spot in your line, or the defensive lineman that has a similar grade, I think for Ryan Poles, even if you have to divert a little bit from how you typically do your grading, like, yeah, we do need the offensive lineman. We really do, because like we just need to ensure that Caleb Williams can stay upright. So it is I think that's the biggest miss on Ryan Poles so far, is that you haven't put quality guys, not the quantity, but the quality type of players that you want to see from your front five.
Right, like we got the quantity, and they all suck outside of Darnell. and I love Tev, but I don't think first he didn't even bring in Tev. That was one of Pace's last picks, and also maybe you could speak onto it in another episode, but I personally don't think Tev wants to be here. I felt that for a couple seasons now, which I can't really blame him, but also like, the inconsistencies of his play too. Can't have your cake and eat it too. But unless you're Eddie Lacy. But, I think the last topic we're going to be getting into today, first, we're just going to say 1 to 10. We're going to fly through these because I don't want to keep you too long, and then just go through where you're at right now on who you want. I want to start off with Aaron Glenn. 1 to 10, how much do you think that would contribute to the Chicago Bears? 1 being you are horrible, and 10 being I think it could work.
Oh, yeah, and Aaron Glenn is a really interesting candidate. I think with that the metric there, I'm a higher upside on Aaron Glenn, so I'm gonna give him about a 7. Okay. For a defensive guy too. Like, he's not in my top 5, but I can see him working, just in terms of how he kind of operates, what he's done with that Detroit Lions defense. And there's a recent clip of him saying that he's not just a defensive-minded coach, he's a coach. And I think he would hold players accountable. You just wonder who's he bringing in for his offensive staff exactly. But, yeah, I think he can be a nice, solid 7 there.
For sure. I like a 7. I think that's solid. Pete Carroll, 2 Super Bowls. I'm passing on him the same way he passed on the goal line. But where are you at with Pete Carroll right now?
I'm going to be higher on Pete Carroll than I think most people, just having talked to some people that know him firsthand. And it would be, I think, you would have to have a succession plan afterwards, because that's 73 going to be 74 by next season. Yeah, he's up there in age, but from what people have told me, like, the dude is like a 54-year-old, not a 74-year-old. He's going to be 74-year-old. I think he would do some good things in terms of culture, working well with Caleb. Whereas 7 with Glenn, I have to put him at a 7.5, 8, somewhere around there. I like the idea of Pete Carroll, and I think that culture that they're kind of looking for to kind of reset here in Chicago, that would easily be set with Pete Carroll in the building.
Sure. I had him at an 8.5, and I took it back down to a 7 after the 33rd pod when Caleb said he wants a coach for the next 19 years. And I was like, true. Respectfully, Pete, I don't know if you got another 19 in you. And that's just, I'm not trying to be a dick. That's the business.
That's life.
19 years from now, do I want a 93-year-old Pete Carroll, even if alive, coaching the Chicago Bears. Kind of reminds you of Tony La Russa on the White Sox. Not rocking with it whatsoever. But I like it. I like an 8. I think a 7.5, 8 is good. Next up, I had his name written down and I completely lost it. I have no idea where it went. But it's the offensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens. I forget his
Todd
name.
Monken.
Todd Monken. I mean, where are you at right now with Tom? Do you think this is a legitimate candidate? I mean, we saw a guy in Lamar Jackson who didn't turn the ball over a lot this year, just like Caleb. So I think this is, for me, I'm giving it a 9. I know that's kind of high. I like it.
No, I like Todd Monken a lot too in terms of what he can do for this team, how he operates, and no, he doesn't have head coaching experience, but man, you see, like you said, look what he's done with Baltimore. Yes, Lamar Jackson was already Lamar Jackson, but he's even having a better year this season. You add Derrick Henry with that too. For me, a grade, I would be close to a 9 on this. Like if the Bears don't get a Ben Johnson, I'm right there with him being like that next tier of guy that I would be comfortable with the Bears going and get. So he's at a 9 for me. I like what he does offensively, and not just in the NFL what he's done with the Baltimore Ravens, but go back to Georgia where they're winning 2 national championships, and you're working with a guy like Stenson Bennett. That's way different than a Lamar Jackson. That's everybody's way different than Lamar Jackson, to be completely honest. But
Yeah.
you got the most out of him. You could see what works well with Lamar Jackson. Why can't it work well with Caleb Williams?
Yeah.
So I'm at a 9 with Todd Monken.
I'm with you. You know, if you could win multiple national championships with a 45-year-old in Stenson Bennett, I think it's definitely a reasonable conversation. But for you, man, I wanted to talk to you so much about Mike Vrabel because I thought you would have amazing takes on that. Now, I felt from the very beginning he was going to New England. I think it's like a Dan Campbell story. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah.
So we'll skip on that one. Unfortunate, but you know, it is what it is. You know, you can't have your cake and eat it too. So I can't interview 20 guys and expect them all to wait for us to make a decision. This one I didn't want to skip out on. Thomas Brown. Where do you think that would even fit if he were to return? Not about how valuable he is, but we've seen with Antonio Pierce, who actually gets a shot to stay with the Las Vegas Raiders. They end up firing him ultimately, but these were guys that even Max Crosby was super high on. So do you think Thomas Brown is a legitimate candidate for the Chicago Bears, or is this just kind of, you know, doing your due diligence to give him that respect?
So to answer that first question, do I think he's a legitimate candidate? You know, at this point in the process, I don't think he is. But I also don't feel like if you were to actually hire Thomas Brown as your head coach, I think he would do a lot better than some people expect him to do. And he wasn't obviously put in an ideal situation in the first place. Passing game corner upgraded to the offense coordinator, upgraded to head coach. That's a lot for anybody. But especially in the Bears situation, it's a lot to do. And you saw the success he was having when, you know, he's promoted to the OC in that first game against Green Bay. He was in the box calling play. Like the Bears should have won that game. They realistically should have. And he would have established some things early on if he is the head coach that I think would resonate with this team, because a lot of the players you talk to in the locker room, they like Thomas Brown, how he's pretty straightforward. He's a hard coach. He'll shoot it to you straight. Those are all qualities that Caleb Williams is also looking at in the next OC or coach that he can potentially be with. So I think he would do better than some people expect, but I just don't think that the Bears are actually going to look at him as a legitimate candidate. I'm glad that he got the interview, and wherever he goes next, I think he'll have success at doing whatever it is that he's doing, whatever position it may be. But yeah, I just don't think he'll be here with Chicago.
For sure. And like, here's where I'm at, and not to go into a whole long-winded thing, because we got to get Nikki out of here. I keep saying that. You know, growing up in the city, man, I played ball a long time, and you could tell the guy who just moved to Chicago, who probably lives right outside of Chicago, coaching a bunch of inner city kids. You could tell by the way they speak to you, and you could tell, you know, who's really about it and who's really not. My guy Joe Mack, about that action to this day. That's Macadelic. I mean, that's that. He's one of them ones. Thomas Brown is one of them ones. The way he spoke, the way he conducted himself, even in his final, you know, interview, he gets the game ball from Caleb Williams. Call me about anything ever. Man knew he was getting fired. Man knew this was his last day in the office. He wanted to make sure that they knew that they could always contact him. That's a leader amongst men. And that's somebody that I would play for. Now, I know a lot of people felt the way they did about Antonio Pierce, but the way Antonio Pierce talked, that was Raiders talk. Like that was something I think Raiders fans liked. I think the fan base loved. This is a guy. Like when you talked about earlier, we got to get some dudes on this line. He's a dude. Like I think Thomas Brown is a dude. Now, obviously, still running Shane Waldron's system. I'm not trying to advocate for him being the head coach, but you didn't even get to see what he wanted to potentially do. You know what I mean? So that's where I'm at with him. I think he's an amazing human. You know, I always called Matt Nagy the car salesman, and that's because everything he said is just bullshit, bro. I don't even want to hear. We got to find the whys. Why are you still here? Like that's my only question. But I'm with it. I wish him nothing but the best. I just had to get that out there. But next up, we got three more guys on this list. Ron Rivera, 85 Bear, Super Bowl champion. Do you see that being a legitimate conversation? He was one of the first guys to actually interview in person. We saw what he did with Supercam. So do you see that potentially being a possibility?
Not really with Ron Rivera, and not to like obviously he has accolades and has been a head coach and has worked with guys like Cam Newton. Could he do some decent things? Potentially, but like on the grading scale of real, what he can actually provide for the Bears team, I put him at like a 6 right now.
Okay.
But I also feel like that was one of those candidates that the Bears are not only information gathering, but kind of a respect thing a little bit too. Like, hey, Ron Rivera's out there. Let's interview him. Especially if he's in town, let's get him into the building and see what he thinks about the organization at this point, having been a part of this organization. But I just don't feel like that would be in the consideration as a head coach. DC, I don't know. I mean, if that's what maybe Ron was, looking for these days, if he doesn't get one of the head coaching jobs, potentially. But yeah, I would definitely put that around a 6 at this point.
I like it. Now our last two, and then we'll ask you who you want versus who we're gonna get, which is, I think, a very fair question nowadays. But Mike McCarthy, you saw Kyle Long's tweet the other day, which was diabolical. I don't know if you saw it, but I'll send it to you.
No, I didn't see that.
It's some AI picture of him just eating a Portillo's hot dog, and Kyle Long is one of them ones. He's a dude for sure. But where are you at right now? Former Green Bay Packers head coach, gave you and I nightmares our entire childhood with Aaron Rodgers. But I was 11 years old when he won a Super Bowl, and what's happened since? You know what I mean? So it's what have you done for me lately, league? You've been fired twice, technically not fired, but fired. Where are you at with Mike McCarthy?
He is so polarizing, Mike. Like, you ask some people and it's like, wow, hey, he can raise the floor from where the Bears team is at. And that's right. That's ultimately when I think about Mike McCarthy. I think he would do some good things for the Bears organization. I just don't know where the ceiling's at with a guy like Mike McCarthy. He's helped develop and help with the growth of even like a guy like Brett Favre. After he had a terrible season, he comes in, turns down the interceptions, gets his career back on track. Even Aaron Rodgers, I don't know how much credit you want to give to Mike McCarthy for Aaron Rodgers. He won 2 MVPs with him, won 2 MVPs with Matt LaFleur, but he was still calling some of the plays. So he put him in the right position to execute and capitalize on those yards and touchdowns that he ultimately had in Green Bay. Dallas, when Dak Prescott was healthy, like the offense was humming. They also got blown out by Green Bay in the first round of the playoffs last year. And he's only won 1 playoff game, the whole 5 years he was in Dallas. Yeah. So it's such a polarizing, and for a grade here, man, I mean, it depends what you ultimately want from your head coach. You want championships?
I want a Super Bowl.
You want a Super Bowl. Everybody wants a Super Bowl.
Nick, here's where I'll make it for you, all right? I want all Bears fans to understand, too. 10 is not to be relevant. If 10 was to be relevant, Lovie Smith would still be the head coach of the Chicago Bears because he kept us fucking relevant. We haven't been relevant in forever. So if 10 is the standard of a Super Bowl, where are you at with McCarthy?
I mean, he's got to be around that 7.3 range for me. He's not getting there. I just don't think no head coach has ever won a Super Bowl with 2 teams.
Sure.
Does it scream that Mike McCarthy is going to be the first dude that's going to do that? It doesn't. It just absolutely doesn't.
With the Bears and Packers at that, too.
God, now that
Horrible.
I don't know why I didn't even factor that in
Can you
there.
imagine
Yeah,
those
Bears
Super
and
Bowl
Packers.
rings on his finger? You're just looking at him and you're
That
like, this is horrifying.
this
Like,
is conflicting. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. You have to have one on one hand and one on the other hand so you
yeah.
can show them like separately. But again, I think he would do some good things, even for Caleb Williams. But some of the time clock management issues that you've seen that the
Couldn't get
Bears need
worse.
to correct, yeah, it could get worse, and you don't want to go through any more Thanksgiving final seconds of the game. Like you just don't want that. Um, so that's where he 7.2, 7.3 does good things, but I just don't know where that ceiling's at.
I hear you. I hear you. Now, a guy I think a lot of people don't know. I've heard, and I know you could probably speak on it better than I can, that the Bears didn't ask any questions about him actually coaching Caleb Williams. They asked questions about him being a leader, and that's all they found very important. Ben Johnson, where are you at right now with the guy who has learned and been under this culture with the Detroit Lions? Whether or not he wins the Super Bowl, I think that is a huge factor. If they win a Super Bowl this year, I mean, if you weren't already one, now I think you're 1A. You know what I mean? So where are you at right now with Ben Johnson and his capability?
I mean, look, to be completely honest, Ben Johnson is the guy that I think the Bears should go get. He's obviously someone that doesn't have head coaching experience, but someone that has worked his way up through the system, has been with Dan Quinn, even going back to the days in Miami, but has just continued to develop. And a guy like Jared Goff, who was seen as, someone that you couldn't win a Super Bowl with in LA with Sean McVay. Ben Johnson's like, hey, bring him here. Obviously, they make the trade, but now they're competing for a Super Bowl. They're making these playoff runs. It's because of what Ben Johnson has established as an offensive identity with Jared Goff, that rushing attack, all the weapons that they have. I just think schematically he can do so many good things for Caleb Williams and just the weapons that they do have currently. You just don't know how he's going to be as a head coach. And I think that's the biggest question with him. But I'm more willing to take that risk with him than I would with a guy like even Mike McCarthy, who has far more experience in being a head coach. It just, you want to see how it can go because he is he's a younger head coach. He would be a younger head coach. And just that system in Detroit, it works. And how different would it be with a guy like Caleb Williams, who isn't Jared Goff?
Right.
That's also one of the questions that you ask if you're, doing these interviews with him. But I'm willing to take that risk and see what he could do, knowing that he knows exactly what this NFC North is like and knowing how competitive it is, seeing Caleb Williams up close these past two times in the division and knowing that, the Bears easily could have won one of those games. Like it's really intriguing if you're a Bears fan, but Ben Johnson, like out of that scale, like, yeah, he's your 9, he's your 10, he's up there as your guy that I ultimately want. I think a lot of Bears fans want as well.
Yeah, without a doubt. I'm right there with you. And, we'll keep my answer short-winded. I think I don't care who you are as a leader. I think if Dan Campbell believes in you, then I would believe in you. And I think that's really where I'm at with it. The only question I would have, it's not about Caleb, it's not about Rome or DJ or any of them. It's how are you going to do the same things you did in Detroit with that offensive line with this offensive line? How do you get away with these long drawn out plays when you don't have that same protection when you come here? And I think that's my only question, because it's like, Ryan Poles, again, drafting guys that played like him, and it's fair. Olin Kreutz plays with Hall of Famers, and we got a guy like Ryan Poles who didn't see any tick after preseason. So he only knows preseason guys, and that makes sense. If that's what the case is, maybe I said it, not Nick. It is what it is. But Nicky, man, last one. You said you want Ben Johnson. Who did the Chicago Bears hire? Are we disappointed again come February?
Oh, man, who do they end up hiring? Right now, as I'm we are on January 17th, there's been a lot of reports saying it is Ben Johnson or Mike McCarthy. I've been told that you can't sleep on a guy like Todd Monken either.
Sure.
So he's also maybe in the running. The Vegas stuff I think is real with Ben Johnson. I think there is some validity to it. I just don't. I mean, the more and more I think about like the situations, like Ben Johnson wants something. I mean, don't you want to have like an actual quarterback? And Caleb still needs to prove himself. I get that, and there's just some things in Las Vegas that just don't make sense to me. Why Ben Johnson would say that's clearly a better situation, but it does fall back to ownership and the power structure that they have here in Chicago. Who do they end up with, Mike? I think I'm gonna pick between. I'm just gonna say that Ben Johnson's
Sure.
not, because again, the Bears ending up with the top guy. Like, when does that actually happen?
Right.
Why would that happen for Chicago?
Nah, we're good.
Yeah, they're gonna go with Todd Monken. That's who they're gonna end up with, and I think a lot of people, once they learn about him, would open up to the idea and see that he could do some really good things for this Bears team. I think McCarthy will be a finalist. I think Ben Johnson will be a finalist. I think Monken would be a finalist. I'm curious about Cliff Kingsbury. I'm higher on him than some people are.
Sure.
But he had recently said that he won't, do interviews until they're done with the season. But I do, I like the possibility of Cliff Kingsbury, what he can do his second time around as a head coach. So, final answer, I think they end up with a guy like Todd Monken, and I like a lot that he can do. It's just not the top prize in a Ben Johnson.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, I can't believe I clipped on his name earlier, but it was somebody that I've been watching a lot of and working with Harbaugh. I think he'd be great. Be great for this team. But you made me throw one last one at you, man. I just want to ask, from a Bears Kevin Warren standpoint, if you're Kevin Warren and I'm asking you this question, how do you respond to it? How was Cliff Kingsbury not good enough to be the OC last year for you, but now he's a head coaching candidate? That's my only question, is what I'm trying to figure out.
I mean, you can ask that with even Thomas Brown. How is he not good enough to be an OC? I think that goes back to the process of how they kind of go about interviewing these candidates. It's obviously something that's flawed, and I think there was a really good article by ESPN earlier today, kind of showing how the agents and having candidates with similar agents can almost impact an organization. The Bears are, Trace Armstrong has his fingerprints all over this Bears organization. So
Flues and
they need
wasn't it?
Yeah, and that Getsy, Walter, it goes back. So it's something that needs to be figured out, and maybe that's a part of the process where Kevin Warren can come in and be like, we need to do things a little bit differently this time, and just have a more fair process, even if that's the case. We don't have to have the GM and head coach have the same exact agent, even though there's not many agents that represent all these different candidates. So it's a tough thing that the Bears need to figure out, but clearly it's just another thing that has flawed this organization, that has ultimately led to wrong decisions being made. But yeah, Cliff Kingsbury, I think he's going to be, if he does end up doing more head coaching interviews, if the Commanders lose this weekend to the Detroit Lions, which I think they will, then I think he'd be qualified.
I can't take another Jaden Daniels playoff win, Nick. It's not. Hey, we're one pride this weekend. I'll tell you what. Now after that, I hope Detroit gets smoked, but it is what it is. But Nick, man, we appreciate you being here. If you guys haven't already, please give him some love on X, on Threads. I don't know if you're still using Threads. I know some people did, some people didn't. Instagram, everywhere. Nicholas_Moreano on Instagram. I believe on X, you can just type in Nicholas Moreano. He's gonna be the first one that pops up, and we'll definitely be seeing more of him. We'll definitely be seeing him somewhere. I don't know where. It's kind of like the Ben Johnson stuff. I have no idea what's going on with Nick, but I think we'll see him a little bit of everywhere, man. But we appreciate you guys tuning in. We appreciate you guys being here. Make sure you give us a like, give us a follow if you haven't already, to the Give Us a Shot Network. Until then, we'll check you guys out later. Bear down, baby. I'm sorry.
Give them a shot to do what?